Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelf. Because I own 51% of this company, I own 100% of it and it's not a company, but yay! Today I am talking about this handy-dandy YA fantasy romance duology which harkens back to the very early days of Judith the book blogger. Yes, today we're going to chat about Renée Ahdieh's The Wrath and the Dawn duology. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I bought both of these books myself. I honestly can't remember where. I know that I bought one of them at my first ever Yalk, which would have been in 2017, where essentially I turned up, did not speak to anyone and left early. Plus ça change. Regardless, no one's paying me to talk about books. All opinions are my own. As usual, I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible while still talking about two books. If you want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, click away now. And finally, to address something of what may become an elephant in the room, at the moment it's more of like a mouse in the room, I don't know. I've opted to not discuss the representation in this book, largely because I think the conversation about own voices has come on since 2015 when these were first published. I appreciate that wasn't that long ago, but a lot has changed in publishing in 5 years. And on top of that, I'm not the best person to be speaking to those issues. So in this review, I'm going to be focusing in on the writing and the story. That's not me suggesting that I don't think representation is an important factor into whether or not you should purchase and read these, but these have been out for a while. There are other reviews out there that will help you make that decision that come from a more informed place than I can. The Wrath and the Dawn was originally published in May of 2015, and it was followed by The Rose and the Dagger in April of 2016. It is a YA fantasy duology that draws on the story of Shahrazad and the Arabian Nights. It diverges from that narrative quite quickly though, so I don't know if I would call it a strict retelling. It's more that's its starting place. Renée Ahdieh is a US-based author who has also written the Flame in the Mist series and the Beautiful series, which is her latest. It involves vampires. I've read all of the Flame in the Mist series and I've read the first book in the Beautiful series, The Beautiful, and neither of them I enjoyed as much as I enjoyed this duology, but pretty much all the time we're looking at YA fantasy romance. I do think it's odd that these books that come so much earlier than her other books are stronger, but you know, sometimes that happens, and possibly that's a matter of personal preference and nostalgia on my part. So this story starts in a familiar place. The brave and wily Shahrazad ends up married to the Caliph, who has been marrying a new woman every single day and killing her before the morning. But in this case, the focus is not on the stories that she tells him in order to stay alive, but on her plan and her actions, because Shahrazad has turned up to kill the Caliph. And also to discover why on earth he suddenly started doing this. I'm not going to go too much further into the plot, but given that I've already told you this is YA fantasy romance, I'm guessing you can see where things are going to go from here. I actually think this is a really nice YA fantasy romance. I've talked before about how sometimes YA fantasy can take the idea of enemies to lovers maybe a smidge past believability, and maybe even a smidge past I can maybe agree with this in a YA fantasy context. Sometimes you just think, no, these people should not be together. Again, maybe that's a personal thing. I find it very difficult to suspend the part of my brain that goes, but they were trying to kill you 5 minutes ago. Don't put your tongue in their mouth. Though I will also maybe fully grant that 15-year-old me would have thought that was the most romantic thing ever, so... Regardless, I do think this book puts effort into any of the redemption arcs within the story. There is work done there, which is part of what's important about a redemption arc, in my opinion. Part of the reason is that, however secretively, Shahrazad does have power. This isn't a, lion versus the lamb kind of, oh, she has no hope, but she's so pretty that it kind of works out for her. Yes, there is still an element of, would this really work out long term? And you're 16 and seem to have fallen deeply in love very quickly. But in the context of YA fantasy romance, there are far fewer quote-unquote sins than you might find in other stories. Wider story is something interesting to address, so the story beyond the romance. While the romance is absolutely the focus, I think the wider story really adds to the completeness of this duology. This is particularly true in book 2, where we expand the world beyond the confines of book 1. We have some of those quiet romance moments, but we also have some heavy action sequences, which means the duology feels more balanced. It just feels like a very complete duology by the end. Emotions are dealt with, things are tied off, it's good. Quite importantly, I like Shahrazad as a character. I've loved the idea of Shahrazad as a character since I first encountered her in a big storybook when I was little, so I would have been annoyed if they got her wrong. But she does fit this YA character mould quite well. Maybe she dips into she's a little bit too perfect at times, but hey, sometimes you do just want that strong female character of your dreams. For a little bit of context for this, these were actually probably the second and third Renée Hardier book I ever read. I read Flame in the Mist first because it was an early review copy I received, and I think it was in a fairy loot box, and I actually really didn't enjoy it because my brain went in thinking like, oh yeah, this is a Mulan retelling, how interesting. It's not, but that was what I thought in 2016. And I didn't twig that it was far more of a romance intentionally. So with that in mind, if you aren't interested in reading a YA fantasy romance, you are not going to enjoy these books. That is what these are. I know that sounds like common sense and is common sense, but if you go in expecting these to be different, you won't enjoy them. Whereas if you go in thinking this will be an enjoyable romance, you'll probably have a good time. Manage your expectations. That's always something we fight for here on this channel. Equally, there's maybe a little bit of a love triangle, so if that's something that you really don't get on with, then no, don't read these. So if you're interested in YA fantasy romance, then yay, go for it, these are fab. If that's not something that you want to read, then you have 2 fewer books on your TBR. There you go. Some quick comparisons. If this is something that you're interested in, I thought The Tiger at Midnight by Swati Teerdala would be a really good option, as well as Girls Made of Paper and Fire. Those are both really great YA fantasy with heavy leaning romance and some enemies to lovers stuff happening as well, maybe less so in Girls of Paper and Fire. As I said at the start, I haven't addressed representation here, so I don't want to just jump in and say, hi, a white lady, think you should absolutely go and read these because I can't see any problems with them. What I do suggest is that you go to the Goodreads page and to Amazon and potentially other people's blog sites and BookTube and see what other people have thought first. The conversation around Own Voices books changes a lot on bookish internet, so it's not as simple as making a black and white yes or no answer. All I can say is I think the story, the characters, and the romance at the core of the story are well done. And as somebody who already owns copies of these books, I will be hanging on to them and rereading them whenever I need that specific comfort that a YA fantasy romance provides. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below with your other romance recommendations, YA, fantasy, or otherwise. While you're down there, you can also follow me on all of my social media. That's linked below. You can subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Welcome back to Dead Good. Where's my phone? There. Oh no, my coffee's over there. Well, this is just the way we live now. I will see you in some time when you are cold. I need to stop inflecting up at the end of everything. I'm not asking questions. As I said at the start, my battery is about to die. Let's see how far we get.